Show us the greenhouse, Annabeth. Where's the greenhouse? Which way? Which way is he?
It's late winter and the days are getting longer, the light is returning, so we're beginning to think about planting seeds. Now, what is a seed? A seed is a little bundle of life. Here's a Shinshu runner bean. We won't sacrifice this on the altar of science to open it up. Instead, we'll plant it later on today, but I soaked it overnight. This is the largest of the Phaseolus vulgaris, and it demonstrates the parts of the seed. We have a seed coat, which is a permeable or impermeable protective testa on the outside of the seed. We have the micropyle, which is the little hole in the notch of the seed, and that's where the pollen goes in to enable the growth of the seed in the first place. And it's also a place where water often is imbibed by the seed, and it's also the place where the root radical comes out when the seed is sprouting, at least near that area. So on the inside of the seed you have the nutrient resources, which are known as the endosperm, the embryo, which is composed of the cotyledon leaves, and the root radical. And when seeds germinate, they've been put in a medium where that's acceptable to their growth, where the moisture and the temperature are appropriate. These are the conditions of germination. The water will be imbibed into the seed by means of going through the testa or the seed coat or through the micropyle. The cotyledons will begin to swell. There will be the production of hormones, and the seed coat will soften, the radical will elongate, and the plumule, which is the cotyledons and the green parts of the plant, will begin to unfold, and that's what we know as germination. The one thing that we're missing in this whole description is the spark of light, of life, which is something that scientists have never been able to explain, but is necessary in the growth of all things. We'll plant this later on today. In preparing for planting seeds, there are various ingredients of the potting soil or the medium where the seed will grow. The most important one is compost. This is cow manure that has been composted for a year and a half and then has been run through a screen like this to take out the lumps and make it a homogeneous material. This is a 1/2-inch hardware cloth. This is sand. Sand is an important part of the potting soil mix and also can be used as a effective top dressing, especially for seeds of desert orientation. Then this is coir, which is ground up coconut husk, and this is a good substitute for peat, which is sort of a fossil resource. So we use a lot of coir in our potting mixes. That gives us the fluffy carbonaceous content. And then this is pumice, volcanic pumice. It's white pumice and basically the result of volcanic activity. This is screened down to a 1/8 inch, and that is very useful for any kind of desert type plants, and also is a good ingredient for potting soil in general. If you don't have pumice, then you can use perlite, but perlite is a poor substitute for the actual basic pumice ingredient. So if you mix all these things together, and there are recipes in our book, Growing Plant Medicine Volume 1, which is highly recommended for getting an orientation on the various exigencies around seed germination. Then you come up with this, which is potting soil. So you mix all these things together, you get potting soil. And the most typical planting that we make in this farm to grow a lot of seedlings closely together, seedlings that can be then pricked out and put into pots or planted out in the field, is the 3-row flat. Here we have a 6-inch deep flat full of potting soil, and we make 3 furrows in it. This is just the simplest production method for lots of seedlings. And then you get your Echinacea purpurea seeds. These are from Strictly Medicinal Seeds. And using the packet to kind of give you some control over the planting, you plant them close together in these shallow furrows. 1, 2, 3. This is the basic technique for warm soil germinators. Then you cover the seeds. Most seeds do best when they're just barely covered, they're just barely subsurface. And then very important aspect is the tamping. So you tamp the planting to give it a sense of place, to give the seeds a sense of place. And then always after tamping, then you moisten. And I've taken to using one of these spray bottles for moistening because sometimes the hose disturbs things too much and the seeds will get floated or pushed around. And what happens later on as they begin to germinate, and these will begin to germinate within a week or 10 days, is that the root radical goes down towards gravity, right? And then if it's disturbed by floating with excessive water and so forth, then the radical gets pushed in a different direction, and then the seed needs to exert more energy to reorient the radical, and so you get a weaker seedling that way. So water very gently, either with the hose on sort of a light spray or with one of these spray bottles, and these will get watered daily. There are fast draining ingredients in the mix. This means that you don't get sort of this anaerobic type of environment. Instead, you have a fast draining environment where the water goes over the seed swells, and then the water goes down and out the bottom of the flat, which has drainage holes in it. Then also, you need to put on a tag and identify what you've done, because even though you remember it in the moment, later on it'll be less likely that you'll remember exactly what was done. So you put the Latin name and the date. 1/15/25. And use that to mark your flat. So that's the basic simplest method for planting seeds.
Okay.
We're going to talk a little bit about stratification, which is the cold conditioning of seeds prior to the germination. A lot of seeds will have an immature embryo, and this is developed over time in cold conditions. And so instead of germinating immediately in warm conditions like your Echinacea purpurea is going to, these seeds are going to require outdoor treatment or second best refrigerator treatment in order to develop their embryo. This is about 50% of temperate medicinal herb species require cold conditioning or stratification before they germinate. So this is a very important aspect. Usually the best way is to outdoor treat the seeds by planting in flats and leaving them outdoors in the shade house or in some other protected area. Some of the species that require this are like Gentiana lutea, yellow gentian, Gentiana lutea, and most of the tree seeds, like in this case the persimmon trees, are going to require planting in the fall for germination in the spring. Elderberries need to be treated that way. California spikenard, Aurelia californica, requires this kind of treatment. There are many, many species that get planted in the fall for germination in the spring. There are others that in the class Ranunculaceae, that's a plant class that is represented by things like aconite and black cohosh. Those need a warm, cold, warm stratification strategy, so they get planted in the summer and they germinate the following spring. Knowing the families of the plants is extremely important in terms of categorizing them for their germination requirements. Legumes, you know, the Fabaceae, the pea family, those are all going to need stratification, or they are likely to need scarification, that is grinding of the seed coat. They are unlikely to need stratification. They come up quickly in warm medium. Many of them are mycorrhizal dependent, so they need an inoculant or soil taken from the forest or soil taken from around a parent plant of the same species and mixed into the potting soil. All those things are significant for the Fabaceae. So know those plant families. Our books, Growing Plant Medicine Volumes 1 and 2, are both oriented in terms of the plant families, and this will give you an idea of how germination characteristics follow those family names. Here we have the persimmons, which were planted in the fall and then germinated in the spring and grew for 1 year. And these actually were planted on 7/23, and so it was a little experiment that I made taking the seeds out of raccoon scat that I found on the driveway. This just brings up for me the idea of on-site experimentation to get more information about plants, seeds, and how they act in your specific environment. Always think in terms of running little experiments, and these indelible tags are very useful for that because they tell you when seeds were planted, and then you can get an idea of how best to do it next time. So these have been in the pot for over a year, and so the soil has become quite compressed, and that's typical. And the way that you upkeep a plant like that is you repot, and when you repot it, then that gives it another start on life. This root is longer than the pot that I've chosen to put it in. And so I'm going to do a root trim, really critical on replanting. And I'm going to use some standard potting soil, just put a little bit in the bottom to start with, so that the root has some place to grow in. Then I orient my roots going down, and when I put in the potting soil, I put it in from the different sides so that when it goes down into the pot, it pulls the roots down along with it and they attain a natural growth shape. And see how I've gone in a little bit too deep? That was intentional, because when I pull up on this plant, then I can put the surface, the old surface spot where it was coming out of the compost previously, I can put it right at the edge of the pot. And how this helps me here, or helps the plant here, is that when I pull up on it, then that reorients the roots, straightening them out and making certain that there's no J root. A J root is really, really bad for trees. It gives them the wrong impression of how to draw up water and mineral and nutrient resources. So then you fill in around the tree, you put the tree right to the center of the pot, and you compress it down. And then if you want to get really fancy, you use an appropriate top dressing. In this case, we'll use some coir. And soils in nature are layered, aren't they? Because, for instance, when soils are made in the forest, they're layered by leaf fall coming down and rotting down onto the mineral soil below. So this is typical for the growth conditions for a tree. And so we put coir on top. And also the coir has no weed seeds in it, so we won't have to weed this. And it's very hydrophilic, so that when we water, it's going to soak the water right down in there. It protects the tree, and the tree will grow better that way. Here's an example of working with planting seeds and reusing the medium, and then what happens. I planted these moonflower seeds and left them in a spot in the greenhouse for about a month and a half, and nothing happened. So I assumed that it was a no germ. And then I covered the flat with coir, and I planted cedar of Lebanon seeds, which had germinated outside. And that brings up for me the idea of keeping an eye out on nature and using natural proliferation of seeds and then domesticating them by planting them inside. So in this case, the stratification of the cedar of Lebanon seeds occurred outside in oscillating temperatures, which is very good for getting seeds started. And then I put them into the coir medium, and they germinated within a week or so. Then after that, the moonflower Datura inoxia seeds all came up. So I ended up with a flat with two different kinds of plants in it. And this brings up for me the fact that if you have a non-germination on a flat, sometimes it works really well to just reorient the flat into a different place. And then this creates a sort of a reset button for the seeds, and they'll germinate. So that's what happened in this case. I moved the flat, the Datura seeds came up. They came up in coordination with the tree seeds that I had planted afterwards. And now I'm going to be faced with a pricking out of two different species, but that's going to be completely possible. I'll just empty this out once these seedlings become a little bit more advanced. I'll empty the pot out and individuate the seedlings into pots where they can grow on. Scarification, that is the striation of the seed coat so that the seed can imbibe water and begin the germination process. Many seeds do have an impermeable seed coat, And this is done by nature in order to like improve their longevity in natural systems. Some seeds can sit in the soil for 10 years or longer before they are before the seed coat is sufficiently broken down to imbibe water, or before something happens to naturally scarify the seed coat and germination occurs. But we're going to improve the process, speed up the process. Marshmallow, Althea officinalis, is famous for being an easy germinator, but it also has an impermeable seed coat. So we're going to scarify the marshmallow seeds. One method that I found to be particularly useful, since when you're sort of scrubbing away on the seeds with a sandpaper, a lot of times they can fly out and you lose a lot of seeds. I just put it in one of our handy dandy seed cleaning screens. This is a number 8 screen. And then I use the sandpaper to rub them. You don't want to rub so hard that you grind up the seeds into flour. At the same time, you don't want to rub so softly that nothing happens. I use a microscope to look at the seeds. Oftentimes, that's a way that I can determine whether my scarification has been effective or not, because I can see on the seed coat the striations that are going to allow the water in. Another easy method is to drop the seeds in water and let them go overnight. And then the swollen ones are obviously the ones that were properly scarified, and the ones that are not swollen can be reground. But I've done this a lot of times, and marshmallow needs a moderate scarification. I haven't lost any of the seeds this way. I move them around and regrind them. And then what I'm going to do here is plant in a standard flat with short pots. Those are 4-inch pots. And although, like if I had very few seeds, I could just put maybe 3 seeds in each pot. I'm going to put more seeds in each pot because this is another method of increase. Instead of the 3-row flat that I originally showed you, this is planting more seeds in cells, and then the cells can be taken out and the seedlings depotted after they produce their second set of true leaves, and they can be pricked into another pot. So this is a method of increase. You know, greenhouses always fill up, and so making sure that you're making optimal use of your space is more about management than it is about getting a larger greenhouse. And so one method of management is to start seeds out close together, grow them on, and then prick them out later on in the year when perhaps other plants have been moved out of the greenhouse in the meantime and there's more space for them. So I'm just putting a little sprinkling in each pot, and I keep track of where I'm planting. And I drop the seeds right in the middle of the cell. And the reason for that is if any seedlings from other plants come up, they won't be right in the middle. So I'll be able to better identify my seeds when they germinate if I put them all in more or less the same spot. Okay, for the purposes of brevity, now let's stop here and then put a top dressing on. And in this case, I'm going to use a top dressing of sand. And again, the sand is sterile, so it's going to disallow a lot of the weaker weed seedlings from coming up. I'm putting just a little bit in each cell, like that. And that's covering the seeds, barely covering the seeds. There's no light dependency involved. In other words, the seeds will germinate fine in the dark, so they're completely covered. And then I'm tamping. And one of my little tricks while I'm tamping is to think about the medicine and think about what good the marshmallow plants, this healing mucilage, this food-like medicinal herb will do for people who grow the plant. And then I can coalesce all of that thought process into a non-thought vibration. And that's so helpful for the germination of plants and for their eventual goodness. Then watering without reorienting the seeds. The seeds already have a sense of place. They've been pressed into place. Watering and the label. Continuing with scarification, there are a lot of other methods of scarifying seeds besides rubbing them on sandpaper. They can be nicked individually with a sharp blade, or they can be hot water scarified. And hot water scarification is something that I've gotten into more and more as I plant more and more trees. And these are carob seeds. I poured boiling water on them last night. And you can see that the seeds are swollen and softened by the hot water process. So carob seeds like this don't need to be nicked. They're already on the way to germination. I would just plant them individually. See, a larger seed like this can be planted deeper than the small seeds that we've been working with. And one of the things I like to do is plant the seeds by pushing them into the fast draining soil. The gallon pot is great for a situation where you have less seeds that you're working with and you want to do more species. You can put 5-gallon pots with different labels on them into a single deep flat and get 5 species going in the space that you would have otherwise used for just one species. Then I leave them like that, partially buried in the nutrient-rich medium. And then I put a thick layer of volcanic pumice on top of that. And this has a couple of different uses. One is it disallows the smaller weed seeds from germinating. It seals the carob seeds in place so that they won't move around. When I water this, the seeds won't be moved around because the water is landing on this fast draining medium. And I use volcanic pumice very often in my horticultural work. Like here is a pumice top dressing, a deep pumice top dressing on a tree aloe. This is aloe dichotoma, the quiver tree aloe from South Africa, one of the nicest. And this keeps the top really dry, and you don't have the formation of that green scum that so often really creates this anaerobic environment for plants that's no bueno. So I use the pumice very, very consistently. Small seeds that do well with hot water stratification. I've recently really gotten into the idea of hot water stratifying things like Andrographis, Astragalus, and redroot, Ceanothus americanus. A lot of perennials, woody perennials that are fire stimulated will do really well if you pour hot water on them and let them soak overnight. and plant them in the morning. You can use this kind of a setup. Pour your seeds into the pint jar, pour boiling water on top of them, or look carefully at the temperature recommendations that are in Growing Plant Medicine volumes 1 and 2, because sometimes 160 degree water, like in the case of Andrographis, 160 degree water is preferred. In the case of Astragalus, 180 degree water is preferred. In the case of other species, like your Ceanothus americanus or redroot, then boiling water can be used. But anyway, pour the water in on top of the seeds. Rubber band your seed packet to the front to identify it, and to remind you in the next morning to pour the seeds off through a strainer, and then prick the swollen seeds out. And there's one swollen astragalus seed that was left over. It's already starting to throw a radical after a couple of days, and plant it. And what you'll find is that then you put these potted seeds into a bright light situation where the temperature is at 55 degrees or greater, and you get very fast germination rates. And often you get germination on recalcitrant species like Andrographis that you otherwise would get no results from, or have to wait 6 months until the potting soil was all green and gross looking, and then maybe you would get a few seeds germinating. Instead, you're getting very rapid germination because you did the hot water treatment. Light dependency and surface sowing of small seeds. This is another category that is very typical to the Asteraceae, which are the largest plant family and are the daisies, right? So you want to create an absorptive layer for the seeds to germinate in. But meanwhile, you want to have a nutrient-rich potting soil underneath that absorptive layer. So what I do is I largely fill a flat with standard potting soil. And we're working with Arnica montana now, so I'm putting a sort of a neutral pH top dressing on the flat to grab those seeds. And then I'm going to smooth it out a little bit. You don't want to necessarily smooth it out completely, because it's nice when the seeds fall between particles of the top dressing. Arnica montana is sometimes considered to be a challenging germinator, but if you do it in this way, you'll have very quick results. The seed is elongated, and again, I'm planting by putting a little pinch right in the middle of each one of those cells. Probably 10 or 12 seeds per. You know, putting one seed only per cell is a little too much faith. There are various things that can be at work here, including different germination times of the seeds, a germination rate that might be less than 100%, seeds orienting properly and or improperly on the planting. So now we have the seeds on the surface of the top dress, and we're going to press them in. So now they're gaining a sense of place, aren't they? They're sort of stuck into the particles of the top dress. And then a method that I often use to create an even covering for seeds of this nature is to use a screen or one of these flats that has holes in the bottom of it, put my top dressing in there, and then so this is just barely covering them, right? And I can still see some of the seeds are still poking through. That's good because they need light in order to germinate. That is phytochrome that exists in the seed coat that acts sort of like a light switch on and off for seed germination. And the reason that nature came up with the phytochrome intermediary is because she's making sure that the seeds are high enough in the soil strata in order to be able to throw their weak little plumule to the light instead of germinating deep down in the soil where they would have no choice, no chance of breaching into the light. So here's a Arnica montana that I planted about 6 days ago with exactly this methodology. And you can see that it's already working really well.
Yeah.
Sacred white sage, Salvia apiana, such a good thing to organically grow and use for your purification purposes. A lot of people do have trouble with this one, so I'm going to give you sort of my infallible trick on germination of white sage. I'm using again a standard flat of fast draining potting soil. It has some sand added into the mix so that it's a sort of a sandy mix. And then I'm top dressing with pure sand. Take that leaf out of there. Then I'm going to take my sage seeds and I'm going to sprinkle them right on the surface. And then here's the funny thing, sometimes they'll land right in between the two pots, and it seems like those are always the ones that germinate first. So that's a little clue that a high rate of drainage is particularly helpful with something of this nature. And then oftentimes when I am finished distributing the seed carefully like that, there will be a little bit of seed left over. And so then I go ahead and just plant that in a spiral from the outside towards the inside, looking for the self, or from the inside spiraling out to the outside, acknowledging the oneness of everything. Then instead of, this is extremely light dependent, must really grow in sand. So I'm going to press the seeds into the surface like that, and then I'm not going to add any more sand to the top. So these seeds are just pressed into the medium, and then it's very important to moisten them carefully with the spray so that they don't move around. See, there was one that moved around anyway. It's all a learning experience. The white sage seeds have been sprinkled on the surface of the sand. They've been pressed in and moistened. These were actually considered to be a very nutritious food source by Native American people in what is now eastern San Diego County. So they're not only nutritious for humans, but they're nutritious for birds and small mammals as well. And so a lot of times after you plant these flats, especially when the seeds are right on the surface like that, you want to provide some protection from the birds, because otherwise the birds will just come and eat their fill. And once birds start feeding on a flat, you can be sure that they'll get every seed. That's just the nature of them. So you use this 1/2 inch hardware cloth again, and sort of mold it to the flat, and that allows full movement of air and full access to light, but it discourages the varmints. And you set these things up on a table so that they're away from the slugs. And then also sand prohibits fungus gnats, which are a real problem for a lot of people in greenhouses. So fungus gnats won't affect this flat. And if you ever do have fungus gnats going for your flat, then you can do a top dressing of sand, and that will discourage the fungus gnats. So we're using a deep pot here, and we also demonstrated at the beginning the 3-row flat that is typical for production of seedlings with the Echinacea purpurea. And that depth is good for encouraging a typical natural root growth pattern for the seedlings. Don't waste your money on commercial seed starting kits that have these little cells that are about an inch deep and come with a small bag of compost. This is not enough compost for your purposes. It's not enough depth for the development of good seedlings, and especially if it comes with one of those domes. You put that dome on there, and then there's no air circulation, and you're very likely to get damping off disease in your seedlings. So don't waste your money on the kit. Instead, go for the basic ingredients and put it together from the bottom up. Then don't waste your money on bottom heat methods. When plants germinate in the nature, they're not warmed from below, except in possibly a few small areas that are geothermally warmed. So it's not natural. Heat comes from above, it comes from the sun. Plants eat light. And so to provide heat to your flat, it's better, and we can pan across here to the seedlings of the white sage. It's better to provide light from above, like using these T5 grow lights with full spectrum incandescent bulbs in them. Plant according to the seasons. The perfect time to plant a seed is at the same time that the adult plant drops the seed in nature. So these white sages were planted around Halloween last year, and that is around the time when the seeds drop from the plant in nature. And they're very tender here underneath the lights, but they're doing fine. I keep them on the dry side. I keep them in a sand-based compost, and then later on these will be moved outdoors to harden off and then transplanted to the field to make white sage medicine. If you can't plant the seed at the same time as the mother plant would drop the seed in nature, which happens very frequently, then the next best bet is to plant the seed according to the early spring schedule. And in the warmer zones, you'll start planting in greenhouses in February. In the colder zones, you'll be planting seeds in the greenhouse in April. But by May or June, the greenhouse should be emptied of starts, and you'll be out in your garden up to your elbows in plants. And so follow those seasonal oscillations in planting your seeds and raising up your seedlings. From February through April is going to be your busiest time in the greenhouse. After that, you'll be free in the garden. There are cycles everywhere in nature, and they're circular, like the feminine aspect. The moon, too, has an influence on seed germination and plant growth. The moon pulls the tides. The moon also helps pull water into seeds and helps them germinate. Another reason not to use bottom heat is because it keeps the soil at a consistent temperature. And if this is the case, then you don't have the kinds of swelling and shrinking that help break the seed coat and allow the seed to feel like it's in nature, where the sun of the day warms the soil and the cool moon of the night cools the soil. So that kind of daily oscillation, the monthly oscillation of the lunar cycle, where oftentimes it works best to plant the seed right before the full moon, because the lunar influence is the greatest at the full moon. So as the moon is waxing from new to full is a really good time to plant seeds. The seasonal oscillations from spring to summer, fall to winter, and especially planting seeds in the fall for germination in the spring. These are very, very significant in terms of making sure that your plants will be in tune with the natural cycles. When you use lights, turn them on in the morning at daybreak and turn them off in the evening at sunset. That will allow your plants to acclimatize more readily to outdoor conditions once you plant them outside. The ginkgo tree, Darwin called it a living fossil. For some time I thought I really understood how to work with ginkgo seeds. They were to be given 30 days of cold, moist stratification, and then brought into the greenhouse, and then they would germinate in 30 days. The seed has an immature embryo, must be washed out of the fruit because the fruit is germination inhibiting. And for years I continued on in that way, and it always worked infallibly. And then one year it just stopped working. And so I would bring in the flat. After 30 days there would be no germination. I would dig up a seed and examine it, and there was really no sign of germination. So I took the flats and I put the flats back outside again, and I just kind of forgot about them. Later on they started to kind of grow a green scum, and I put some coir on the top of them to sort of restart them. And then about midsummer they all germinated. And so the lesson here is that as much as we think we understand how seeds work, when to expect their germination, how to treat them in order to get the most out of them, there's always going to be a factor that's beyond the human influence. And this involves our place in great nature. So we don't deteriorate into a mental state of blame or any kind of emotional state like anger. Instead, we just continually open ourselves to becoming one with nature, and then we work with the results. Peace. Oh, a bird got in and pulled up a bunch of my seedlings of cedar of Lebanon last night, and it was so sad because they were really doing well. And then I noticed that the cedar of Lebanon that was mixed in with the Datura moonflower went completely unscathed.
Annabeth just came up and started grazing on this chickweed.
Yeah.
You eat chickweed?
Yeah, that's chicken.
I eat that too.